Hey, after school here. So I make a kind of a video on a different topic than I normally do, but something actually I work with and I think about a lot. That's AI. So this talks about discussing if AI is a bubble or a scam or what exactly its future potential really is. So to begin, talk about scams in general. So we all know scams are driven by human psychology. It's a promise of future wealth, a sense that everyone's doing it. That's a selective memory. We remember, we forget about the losers of the past and we remember the winners, and it gives us a distorted sense of what's possible and what this current opportunity that we're considering might offer us. Not an objective evaluation, but one based on what we want to remember and how we want to remember it. And we do things based on what the imagined future will be, right? We think about a planning for the future, thinking about the future, um, driving defensively because you imagine you could have an accident. Things like that are generally good because we're doing something that a species with less consciousness might not, and that's allowed us to advance as a species in a lot of ways. It's generally a good thing, but because we have this kind of inherent quality in our psychology, it's something that people can take advantage of. And so, if we're looking to see if there's a bubble, then what are the typical warning signs? And first of all, it's speculation. When people are considering an investment, they're looking at this future potential and they're thinking, well, the sooner I get in, the greater my returns will be. And so when you're in a bubble, it looks like you're getting in on the ground floor. Later, in perspective, it looks like buying high and selling low. But as anyone in finance will tell you, predicting the market is not a thing that we are particularly good at. So being able to pick where we are in the bubble is really not something we're good at. We may be at the very beginnings of a bubble. We may be near the end of when the bubble pops, or who knows exactly when it comes to AI. But our ability to perceive that isn't particularly good. So this is more about, is AI a bubble currently, or could it be in the future? As a yes, no, rather than a where we are in that bubble and what to do about it exactly. Also, overvaluation. And we have an easy way to evaluate these days with stock price. Stock price isn't necessarily a great measure of all things, but it's a pretty objective way to look at things. But is current price based on a disproportionate future value? Are we overvaluing the future value of this thing? That's overvaluation. And then again, psychology, and selective memory of past events, herd behavior. If people are doing it, that gives us a sense that this is a real thing. This is something that we may want to consider for ourselves. If you're out on the street and there's a whole crowd of people screaming and running away from something, you'll probably join them and start running away from it as well without actually knowing what that thing you're running away from is. So we're very, very susceptible to herd behavior. It's hard to go against the grain. All right, so we talk about speculation a little bit more. And here is their clear business plan that plausibly explains future value. And this is where the tech world, for the last, I don't know, 10 years at least, probably more, is just completely crazy. The business plans often are not business plans, first of all, but when they are, they're based on, product usage, doubling every year infinitely or exponentially increasing forever, how the line goes up, right? This idea that this value will increase to unimaginable values. So if we make $1 of profit on one customer, all we need is a billion customers and we're billionaires. Sure, if you can get a billion users and the cost of providing the product to a billion users is the same as one, then maybe, but it never works that way. So speculation, or rather business plan, does it plausibly predict that future value? And I'd say tech business plans really never do. They're completely insane and out of reality. So that's tech in general. But how's the performance been so far? Are we really considering that? So have we looked at these AI companies' current performance, current profitability, and the trajectory that they're on to kind of guess at what will happen in the future? All right. Not often, right? We even though OpenAI is losing tons of money every year, well, surely in the future that'll change, and they'll have a huge profit. Well, but what's that based on? Our hopes, our dreams? Is there an actual plan to achieve that? We don't know, but current performance is not predicting that. And how will current performance improve over time? What's the plan for that exactly? For a lot of these tech projects is kind of, some magical event happens in the middle that makes it all make sense. But there's a lot of speculation right now, certainly in the tech world, and especially when it comes to AI. Overvaluation. So again, going back to stocks, not the only way we can measure this, but it's kind of an easy, objective way to look at it. Profit to earnings ratio is sort of a way of determining a fair value of a stock on the stock market. So for the S&P 500, which is a stock market index, 500 companies that are essentially considered to be the most well-run, the most effective, most stable companies, their profit earning ratio is about 15.5. Of the Magnificent Seven, which we'll talk about here in a minute, those are mainly our technology companies, it's 35. So, more than double. NVIDIA, which makes hardware that's used in AI, as of August 2025 was 57. So that is dramatically higher profit to earning ratio and price to earnings ratio. And so that indicates more overvalued stock than a typical S&P 500. Is it at a dangerous level? Hard to say exactly, but it is an indicator of overvaluation. All right, so talk about the Magnificent Seven. These are 7 companies, 7 tech companies that make up a substantial portion of the S&P 500. Currently, about 34% of the index's value is in the Magnificent Seven. So 1/3 of the market is represented by these 7 companies of the 500 that are in that index. So that just gives you a sense of their scale compared to the others. Market cap, $12 trillion in the Mag 7, which is 11% if you compare it to the entire world's GDP, gross domestic product. That's kind of a staggering thing to consider. US GDP, about 27 trillion. So it's more than a third of the US GDP, just in comparison. So massive, massive, massive valuation. Overvaluation, one might guess. And from this article I found, we estimate the GDP would have have grown at a mere 0.6% annualized rate in the first half if it were not for AI-related spending, clearly weaker than the reported 1.1%. So what they're talking about here is the reported U.S. GDP for the first half of 2025 that annualized. AI spending was about half of our GDP. Half of our GDP is AI spending by these 7 gigantic companies. So that's kind of out of scale for normal things. Well, maybe AI is so remarkable that it's worth this crazy, crazy valuation, right? It's going to transform the world. It's going to transform labor. It's going to transform everything. It's going to fundamentally change how the world works. Okay, well, then maybe it is really that valuable. We'll see. So just to add a little more clarity, the Mag 7, Magnificent 7, it's Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Tesla. And so Alphabet, probably better known as Google. It's an advertising company, right? That is actually how they make most of their money. And they also have a cloud platform and, other variety of things, but those are the main items here. Amazon, the retail sales, of course, cloud platform. Apple's electronics, Meta's social media, Microsoft is software and cloud platform. NVIDIA is the company that makes essentially all of the world's AI hardware right now. There may be other companies that do have some related products, but NVIDIA is kind of the only game town currently. Will that change in the future? I don't know. It's not that easy to make chips like this. The kind of investment that needs to be made to do it is extreme. And even if you do have the investment, it's still not a guarantee you'll be successful or that it'll be competitive or any of those things. So, yeah, that explains why NVIDIA is so huge these days. They're, make video cards. Video cards, not as significant a portion of their company as AI is, has really changed dramatically in these past few years. Tesla, who knows what Tesla is these days? Presumably they're a car company. Their car sales are declining pretty rapidly, even while other electric car companies and electric cars in general have been doing better. So Tesla's decline is sort of out of sync with the rest of the EV market. Not completely, but yeah, enough. And what else they do? They're calling themselves an AI and robotics company, but they don't have any real product yet. So yeah, I don't know what Tesla is exactly. It's a strange thing. So, okay. Going on psychology, we'll get the herd mentality. If everyone else is doing it, well, everyone can't be wrong, so I might as well do it too. Everyone's making money, why am I not making money? I lived through the .com era, and I remember this very, very distinctly about how people were talking about how you needed to invest in these companies. It was the future. Everyone's going to get rich. It's a sure thing. This stock's been going up by this amount every year. It's going to keep doing that for forever. Well, it didn't work out that way, of course. It crashed really hard. And so people say, well, but it worked out, right? We have the internet now. We have Amazon. It's a huge retailer. We've got all these online stores. The premise of the .com was correct. That the internet was a valuable commercial product, essentially. Totally true. But the time frame was totally out of sync with the level of speculation that was going on. And again, the business plans for a lot of these .coms were just completely absurd. There were none. So, at least Amazon had retail sales. So that makes sense. That can work. But all the companies that didn't survive, that didn't make it, all the money that was lost, that's what we tend to not remember. Sure, it worked for some, but it didn't work for most. It was not a good situation. Fixation. So we get stuck as people on, that future that we want, which again is generally a good thing for us as people, as a species, but is something that can be manipulated, or we can essentially manipulate ourselves with it. People say things like, sure, it's a long shot, but imagine how rich we'll be if it works. Buying lottery tickets, right? Okay. Well, your chances of winning are basically zero, but you could win. And if you don't play, you can't win, right? So you get fixated on these things. It's natural, honestly. But it is something we have to be careful of. Because are we paying attention to what's going on right now that will affect this future that I am hoping for, dreaming for, want to manifest, right? And then we have sunk cost fallacy. And this is basically where you've made an investment in something and it's not really working out. You see that it's not working out, but because you've invested something in it, you just feel like, if I get out now, I'll lost my investment. It could still work out. I believe it. I believe it. Of course it can. And the most tragic place that we see this is when it comes to war, where you start hearing people say things like, well, we can't pull out of the war and fail because we need to honor the sacrifice of those who have died in this war effort. Right? And we continue to send more people to die in a hopeless or pointless or whatever the situation is. So the more value people have tied up in a thing, the more they need it to work. Also an ego thing there too, right? Like you don't want to feel like you are wrong. So this is a dangerous one for us in our psychology. We have to be careful with this. Things aren't working out. You got to get out. All right, restarting. I broke my recording there. Not that you could have seen that, but in any case, I just finished talking about sunk cost fallacy, I believe. All right, so next up, some classic bubbles. And just to kind of think about, do we actually learn from our mistakes or not? Do we just keep making the same mistakes over and over again, or what's the story? If you've never read about the Dutch tulips, I really encourage you to do it. It's long enough ago that you can kind of think about it objectively and how absurd the whole thing was, but it is a classic bubble. Got things like the gold rush, where, of course, there was gold to be found. People discovered that, and then everyone rushed to join in and get rich in the process. Most miners didn't find any gold and suffered terrible hardship, didn't survive, etc. But they probably brought shovels. Bought some shovels to go dig the gold. And in the end, some of the folks who did best from the gold rush were those who sold mining supplies and shovels, and not actually the miners themselves. Of course, some miners struck it rich, but those were rare cases. So there's an example of a bubble where there were some people who made out, but on average, the average, it did not go well for people. .com, which I remember well, living through that, there is a real sense of extreme optimism about tech stocks, and people were even, I'm not really an investment kind of person, but they're encouraging me, you gotta buy stock. It keeps going up. It's going to go up forever. They didn't talk like that, but there was this sense of like, you're missing out if you don't get in now, because this thing's just going to go up and up. And this bubble is a little different because, well, there was the premise of the .com that these internet companies and internet business, internet as a whole, would be a valuable commercial endeavor. That was definitely correct. But the time frame of that happening, the parts of it that did do well, right? That that was a small portion of what people were investing in the dot-com era. That's sort of the first time people became aware of like how completely absurd tech company business plans were. I mean, companies that made no money were somehow going to end up making money, but with no real plan of how they were going to get there. Somehow this was a good idea. Any case, we know how that worked out. Kind of an interesting example. Subprime mortgage crisis. So while there were a few genuinely evil people who essentially repackaged toxic waste investments into AAA rated investments, and the rest of the market kind of went along with it, there are a lot of people downstream who were just participating in the market in the way that the market was designed. And while they probably had a sense of it's too good to be true, everyone was in on this thing from high to low. Everyone was making some money from it. So why wouldn't you go along with it? Well, that turned out to be a tremendous disaster, and I'd say one that we still have not really fully recovered from. Like, okay, the stock market has recovered, but our institutions, our law around this, our people who were most responsible, did they really get punished and learn their lesson? Yeah, I'm not so sure. Anyways, there's some examples of bubbles to consider when you're considering AI. And if AI is a bubble, kinds of things we're looking for in a bubble are overvaluation. I know we're talking about stocks here for the most part, but that's not really the only thing that could be overvalued. Talking about infrastructure, business structure, and what's the inherent value of this thing? What does AI actually do for us that's so valuable that we should be investing this dramatic amount of money into it to make it work? So let's talk about overvalued stocks. And I focus here on PE ratio, which isn't necessarily the best or the only measure of this, but it's an easy, objective way to compare these things. And PE ratio is price to earnings ratio. It gives you a sense of the value of the stock compared to how much money the company actually brings in. And so for the Magnificent Seven, these 7 tech companies that are heavily involved in AI, PE ratio is about twice the S&P 500 average. So that's kind of normal for tech stocks. So people don't feel that much concern about that. But if you look at Tesla, which is kind of a special case, Tesla itself is worth as much as the 10 biggest car makers combined. That's kind of amazing. Tesla is a small car manufacturer. Right? They have some other products they're working on and could theoretically be a thing, but they are not currently a thing. Currently, they're a small car company. And somehow speculation has pumped up their stock so that they are dramatically larger than the rest of, essentially, the whole rest of the car market. PE ratio of 200, just to give you an example of comparison there. But this is investment, and there are a lot of people who make decent money. Their companies have a 401k or they have an IRA for retirement, retirement account, and they just put whatever maximum value they're able to put into that investment account so they can retire on that money, earn some return on that in the meantime. And so the money generally goes into index funds. Magnificent Seven makes up a good portion of those index funds. So that sort of passive investment money just keeps going into these companies no matter what. So predicting the future value of the stock market is a difficult thing because of this kind of unusual mechanism that is built into it. Companies once thought to stock value to represent the inherent value of the company. You own part of the company by owning the stock. But we've really disconnected from that dramatically, especially in the tech sector. Maybe the whole market, I don't know. But point being, is it overvalued? Well, I think so, but will people keep buying it even though it's overvalued? And I think the answer is also yes. So who knows what'll happen there. Something more practical, because infrastructure actually has to work for it to have any value. Everyone's highly dependent on NVIDIA. They make the main hardware that AI runs on. Without that, there's kind of no AI at all. And there are other chip makers who potentially could be competitors. I really don't know where they are in the race, but at this point, NVIDIA is kind of the only game in town. Data centers, building them takes a lot of time and takes a massive amount of money. So there's just a finite amount of time it will take to build these out. If your business plan is based on scale and reducing costs through scale, or just available power, is that time frame of actually building a physical data center and bringing it to life consistent with that business plan? I don't know. Probably not. Like, if you imagine what, or if you believe what these AI companies are telling you and what AI will be in the near future, I don't think the data centers will be ready to support that in that time frame. So with AI, with OpenAI burning crazy amounts of money every year, are they going to be able to do that long enough for their data centers to catch up to their needs? I don't know. It seems, I think there's a lot of unlikeliness in what I just said there. Environmental costs. So right now, it doesn't seem to be a lot of environmental will around controlling the environmental costs. So that may change, of course, in the future. It's sort of hard to predict. But these data centers consume a lot of natural resources. They have a considerable impact on the communities that they're near. So that's sort of a wild card in terms of these companies' ability to build these data centers. That's why they're talking about ridiculous things like building them on the moon, or what the guy said, talking about building a Dyson sphere around the solar system. It's like completely absurd. In any case, energy supply is also a big problem, and it isn't just the cost, it's actual availability. These consume a tremendous amount of power. Power plants can only produce a finite amount of power. Building out power plants, solar, wind, whatever source of power you're going for, it really takes time. So what happens to the other businesses, other communities, or the data center itself if it doesn't have the power available to make it fully functional? I think there's a huge challenge that is barely in the consciousness of investors. And there's always this belief by tech that scale will solve things. Well, sure, we're unprofitable with 100 users, 1,000 users, but if we just increase that to 1 million, imagine the possibilities. So I guess scale can sometimes solve problems, but it doesn't solve all problems. And right now, we're not seeing that scale is actually reducing the cost of AI. AI is getting more expensive to run instead of less. So thus far, scale has not been shown to be a solution. If it continues to become more expensive, it's really going to be a major, major problem. And when you're building things, infrastructure, you build it, it tends to stick around, which is good feature of it, right? You build a road, you want it to be there in 5, 10, 20 years. You might have to maintain it, but it'll be there. But we're building now for an uncertain future. We kind of know what these models need in terms of capacity, in terms of the types of processors they use, etc. But that's what we know now. It's a rapidly changing technology. Its needs could be quite different in 3 to 5, 10 years, which is the time frame for building these things out. So that's definitely a big risk. So all these things are doable. We're good at building when we want to be. But there's some really serious concerns here. There's a lot of risk, essentially, in the infrastructure component of this. Business structure. So businesses, I think, at least from the outside, people like to think of businesses, the people inside are kind of interchangeable. Like you can just fire 20% of your workforce and everything will be fine. If you need people in the future, you can just hire them. But people, especially in technology, are specialized in their area, and the technological needs of the company can change depending on what the company is doing. This business realignment and the change within these businesses is hard, because we're talking about big companies too. If you're a small company, change is much more approachable, is manageable, even in relatively short term when need be. If you're a huge company, it's much more difficult. We move much more slowly. And that kind of plays into the next point that, it's these big companies that have the money, but it's the smaller companies that are kind of able to be agile and to innovate and come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. And so you could just say, well, sure, well, those big companies just buy the small companies. That's, in fact, exactly what's happening. But then again, you have to integrate that company with a different work culture, different personnel, different tools maybe they're using. All kinds of things may or may not really integrate well with that larger company. So if you experience that, and I bet it involves some pain for everybody involved, and that's not no cost to that. So again, all this is doable. Businesses do change and evolve, even if it's painful for people, almost always. But there's also kind of a sense of you kind of have to pick who the winners are going to be. If you change your business structure, if you choose to integrate AI and lay people off and hire AI experts, you've made a commitment to that path, which isn't going to be the right path. It's hard to say. So there's some risk here, although I would say this one's more manageable than some of these others. Business structure, that is. All right, so coming down to inherent value of AI, what's it actually do that's so useful for us? And my perspective on this, I have an engineering background. I've done some software development. I've used AI as a software development tool. I've integrated AI into a software project, relatively, very small scale. But anyways, have some experience with this. So I've seen what it can do for me as a developer. I can see what it can do in software. And I just fundamentally believe that it's not what most people think it is. So more and more, I just think whoever decided to call it AI is the true genius in all of this, because it's the best marketing term in history. If we just stuck with large language model or gave it some goofy, brand name, I don't know how far it really would have gotten, because people would have looked more at what it actually does instead of what they imagine it could do. You call it AI, it's like, oh, the science fiction books I've read, the science fiction shows, movies I've watched. Look what AI can do there. And it's the same thing. We're just not there yet. Right, okay. Well, the reality is that AI is just good at guessing things. It's good at guessing things because it's absorbed a lot of previous information. And you can use a statistical model to basically generate a response that seems like a reasonable response to a question. It doesn't understand the question, doesn't actually understand anything, can't think, but it can statistically generate stuff that generally makes sense. All right, that's a little bit different than, a sentient machine that can think for us and come up with new ideas and et cetera, all the AI marketing and imaginations of people. And people say, well, it's just an early version, it'll get better over time. That's just the way software is. Computers are. They always get better. They always get faster. They always get stronger. But that is generally true. But how will it get better, and better at what exactly? Because it's not going to fundamentally change what it is. It's still just going to be a good guesser. It just might be a better guesser. And maybe a good guesser or a better guesser is just what you need for your application. I'm not saying there's no application for that, but it's not going to do a lot of things that people are imagining that it can. So to kind of think about this, think about the knowledge depth, right? Okay, just survey level is you do a Google search for something you're not familiar with. You want to research something you don't know. Okay, it gives you some results, and you can read it, and it may have errors. In fact, for a certain percentage of the time, it will be wrong. Just as it's just a fact. Maybe a small percentage time, but whatever that percentage is, it's a real thing. And if you are at a beginner level of knowledge with this topic, you won't know that it's wrong. All right, and so this can lead to some really dangerous results. Now, if you ask it to identify wild mushrooms that you found in a field, if you know about that, well, if it's right 80% of the time, 90% of the time, let's say it's right 99% of the time. The only problem is that 1% of the time you die. Right? It's not okay. So things like that. It's kind of an extreme example, but you can imagine that there's all kinds of places where it could give you bad or dangerous information, and you won't know because you don't know anything about the topic. So at a survey level, I would say AI is actually dangerous. At a functional level, like, okay, you know something about this, you're trying to get something done, you're using it as a tool, right? Classic example would be, software developer, makes sense. So it can do some things for you. It's definitely true. And how you evaluate how useful that is will be different for different people. But I think most people agree, it usually won't just give you the answer that solves the problem. It'll give you something that's in the ballpark, and then you'll have to refine your prompt, and you might get closer, and might have to refine your prompt, get closer. And eventually, you have something that's useful. Right? Because you have knowledge about it, you can look at it to see if there's mistakes in it, errors in it. It does what you want it to, but it's kind of inefficient. But even at that, as any developer will tell you, software errors can be subtle. They can be very subtle. They're not just things that you notice. And more complex the code, more complex code is generally going to be more valuable code, does some more stuff for us. More likely there are going to be subtle errors in it that we don't notice. So that's not good, because those subtle errors could lead to, for example, security vulnerability in software or a website. And so it can make mistakes still. It's can be inefficient, but I'd say there's an argument for it, though. Argument as a useful tool. Some people may feel it is useful for them, and maybe it is. Can't argue with them on that, but it is certainly far from perfect. And at the expert level, I'm just going to call it plain old useless. Maybe that's not exactly true at every situation in every regard, but I think it's close enough that we can just generalize it and say it's useless. Because generally, the AI systems, almost never are they going to have a well-developed body of expert level information and knowledge by which they can do what they do. It's maybe possible in some subjects, I'm not sure, but I would say in general, it's not. And because of that, even at the functional level, I think a lot of software developers are better off just writing their own code, because they're going to be gaining more experience and knowledge about what their own skills rather than kind of like hacking a prompt to produce something that they could have written themselves. And if they can't write it themselves, you have to be really careful that there aren't errors in it that are going to cause some serious problems. So at the functional level, I don't know. Expert level, no, not good. So then we may agree or disagree on these, but that's my perspective. Bigger question would be, of these problems, which of them are going to be improved through incremental improvement in AI overall? So in the first one, might reduce the number of errors that it produces, but they're not going to be eliminated. That's not going to happen because that's not what AI can do. AI is using statistical models to generate results. Well, that's not perfect science. That's not a binary correct, incorrect answer. That's sounds good, right? Always going to be potentially dangerous depending on what you're doing with it at the survey level. Functional level, okay, maybe it'll get better. Maybe it'll be less inefficient. Maybe it'll be less dangerous. But I don't know. As developers generally make software as complex as they're able to. I'm not talking about good coding practices. I'm just saying, like, we push the limits of what things can do. It's sort of part of the job in a way. Some projects anyways. So we're always kind of at our limits of what we're able to understand, what we're able to do, what we're able to keep track of, make sense of, organize. And so then that tool is always going to have that level of inefficiency because it can't read our mind. And it's always going to have the potential for having some dangerous code. So it depends on what you're doing with it. Could get better. I'm not sure. Expert level, I don't believe it can ever actually become useful at the expert level. Okay, so the premise is that AI will replace some human labor. But the question then is what parts, and if that's a significant number of people, what will it do? So you see the headlines that say AI is going to replace 40% of human labor. I think that would basically lead to societal collapse unless that was phased in over decades, if not centuries. 40% of people not having work. Like, how does our society actually function like that? I don't think it can. So if you do believe that AI could do these things, like, it kind of breaks the way our society functions currently. So will it replace some labor? Potentially. But again, I think it's really misunderstood what AI is and what it can do and what it's good at, what it's reliable for. So I don't think we know exactly, but I don't believe this 40%. Just doesn't really make any sense. It's not shown any signs that is a realistic outcome or expectation. And and here's sort of the full synthesis of the idea. Tesla robots doing your job for you. Right? How good would the world be if you could just buy a Tesla robot and send it to your day job, and you could do whatever. You could watch my great videos here on YouTube all day, or I don't know what other valuable thing you could do with yourself. But how does it make any sense? If that were a thing, why wouldn't the company buy a robot and just fire you? It's the companies that are going to have the money, and they're going to have the incentive to do this thing. So why would they need you to be in the equation at all? It just doesn't really add up at all. And for the record, I don't believe that'll ever happen. So what is AI useful for? I do think it has some value. I think it can do some things. There's no arguing that, really. I think one place where it really shines that people don't often talk about is in writing assistance. It can help you draft things. It can help you improve your writing, your grammar. I'm sure I made a million mistakes in this document, so don't judge me on that. But if you write something, you can put it into AI and say, give me a grammar lesson. Explain how this could have been written better. And it will generally do a pretty good job of giving you a lesson to help you improve your writing. So I think there's all kinds of applications in that area where AI could be used effectively, because it doesn't have to be perfect. It could be, because if you ask someone else to give you a grammar lesson, you might not fully agree with all the things that they tell you, right? So the AI is maybe not perfect, isn't really a problem there. Writing is also subjective. You can have mistakes in your writing. People can still understand it. In any case, I think it's really useful there. Brainstorming, I do not find it useful for this at all. I've tried many times, and I just don't really get it. But others find it to be helpful, and so that's totally fine. A totally valid use case for this, in my opinion. Summarizing information, I think it can be helpful, but it's you have to be careful with that, because of course it can make mistakes. If it's something that needs the correct exact details, then it's kind of a disaster because you can't trust it. If it's something more casual, then okay, I guess so. Like meeting summaries, potentially helpful, although it's only analyzing one portion of human communication, may miss some of the nuance that's actually significant, or just make plain old crazy mistakes or make stuff up. That's always possible too. So I'd say that's a use case I've heard about many times, and I don't know that I find it to be that super helpful. It's okay, but it's not that compelling. Data analysis, I've tried to think about where this could really be used for something useful, and I'm just not sure what it is. In most cases where we want to have data analytics, we already have very good tools for doing it, and they're exact tools. They're not sounds good kinds of results, right? We're looking at charts of actual data. If we're looking at data that's been generated with statistics, okay, well, there's a range, there's a level of uncertainty to it, but it's not going to be completely out of the ballpark insane, which AI certainly can be. So perhaps there are applications here, and I read about that concept anyways, so I'll just choose to think it's possible, but I don't know. Foreign language translation, so certain applications, if you're a traveler, just as a tourist, and you need to ask where the bathroom is, it's probably great. If you are negotiating a peace treaty with a foreign country, well, it's not really acceptable, because you need to have a person who can really fully interpret. Translation, it's not a one-to-one kind of process. There's some interpretation, there's some word choices, there's some nuance choices that at this point, you really need a human to ensure its accuracy. Image recognition, again, another one I read about. I guess there's industrial applications for this, but I don't know what they actually are. I'll just choose to assume that is correct. Does that add up to a multi-trillion-dollar business? I don't see it. All right, so the business case, cost of inference is increasing, not decreasing. That's what we're seeing so far. Will that change? I don't know, but right, if we just want to look at what's happening now and not use magical thinking of what could happen in the future, the costs are increasing. They're not decreasing. Scale is not helping us here. Massive, massive, massive economic, environmental, and energy costs for data centers. Difficult to see how that investment and the timeframes of those investments align with the business plans of what's currently going on in AI. If AI turns out to be this wonderful thing in the future, I think it's going to be a bit more like a .com situation where there's going to be a collapse, because the companies as they are now are completely financially unsustainable, and they're not going to be able to survive the time frame by which to get to this wonderful future. So I think that's the best case scenario, at least in my opinion. It's kind of a dot-com crash where there is potential value there in the future, but the current companies and the way they're going about things is not going to work out. And what do I mean? Okay, only AI company with meaningful income, not talking about profit, just income, actually has a product that's being sold for money. It's AI, right? Not to say there aren't any other companies that make money, but that's the only one with like a meaningful level. OpenAI, ChatGPT. 2024, they lost $5 billion. They had $3.7 billion in income, supposedly. That means they lost almost $9 billion. They spent almost $9 billion, I should say. They spent $9 billion to make $3.7 billion. That's not good. AI is projected to lose $14 billion by 2026, with total losses from 23 to 28 expected to reach $44 billion losses of $44 billion. So then they're probably going to make, let's just pretend they're going to make, 6 or 10 billion in that time frame. That's going to be their income. That means they'll have spent $50 billion plus dollars. Yeah, and where is it going exactly? Right now, it's not going anywhere good at all. They just released their latest model, GPT-5. And if you read about it, people are not happy. I think the best evaluation of it, like the most positive evaluation I've read about it, is that it's not really any different. The worst is, well, people think it's considerably worse. They don't like it for a variety of reasons. So that's not going anywhere. What's going to happen that's going to change this equation? It doesn't seem like it's going to be OpenAI. So if you don't believe me on all this, you can take a look at this report that MIT put out, the Gen AI Divide, State of AI in Business 2025. You can search for that. I don't know if the original link is on MIT's website anymore. I don't know why, but I have a link to the web archive. Actually, I've already got it open here. And I think this myth kind of sums it up for me. AI will replace most jobs in the next few years. Researchers found limited layoffs from Gen AI, only industries that are already affected significantly by AI. No consensus among executives to bring levels over the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, so enterprise, big businesses aren't really expecting things to change for them as far as AI is concerned for the next 3 to 5 years. Again, going back to that time frame thing, so businesses don't expect anything to be happening for 3 to 5 years. You got the time frame of building out the data centers, and then you've got these completely unrealistic so-called business plans from these AI companies that won't survive 3 to 5 years. So there's a huge mismatch right there. Generative AI is transforming business. Adoption is, the language here is strange to me, but it says adoption is high, but transformation is rare. Only 5% of enterprise have AI tools integrated into workflows at scale, and 7 of 9 sectors show no real structural change. So by adoption, they're meaning they're trying AI. Transformation meaning they're using AI. And only 5% have integrated tools into their workflows at scale. So that's kind of nothing like what we imagine is happening in AI, where the headlines are like, if your company isn't investing in AI, it doesn't have an AI strategy, they're being left behind. Well, who are you being left behind by exactly? Because enterprise is barely using this stuff, barely even integrated this stuff into their workflows, let alone benefiting, proving to have benefited from it. So, yeah, that's interesting. Enterprises are slow to adopting new tech. These are myths, right? Okay. Enterprises are extremely eager to adopt AI, and 90% have seriously explored buying an AI solution. So basically, everybody is like, oh, we got to get in on this thing. But then, how many are actually even trying to use it? Very, very few. Kind of a mismatch between perception and reality, which I think this is probably the premise of my whole video here. The biggest thing holding AI back is model quality, legal, and data risks. What's really holding it back is most AI tools don't learn and often don't integrate well into workflows. 0.5, not really pertinent to our discussion here. 0.4, though, is murders it. AI tools don't learn. Isn't that the kind of the premise of intelligence? Don't integrate well into workflows. Like they can't find a use for them. They aren't helpful. They're inefficient. Again, that is my general opinion. Although this is an extremely harsh statement right here. What's holding it back is they can't learn. They don't learn, and don't integrate it well into workflows. Well, what's going to change to make that true? If they aren't learning now, they're not capable of learning now, how will that change in the future? Because the data sets that these things need to function are absolutely enormous, and the cost of training them is incredibly, incredibly high. So you can't just pour in a little bit new information into them, and it's just going to have a meaningful effect. So what people do is they develop much more and more complex prompts and instructions to the AI so that we can guide the AI better to get the results that you want. But again, it goes back to the inefficiency part. Like AI is not actually learning. We're learning to use AI better through prompt engineering. But prompt engineering is kind of like pushing buttons on the outside of a black box and getting some results that, yeah, I don't know, not good, and don't integrate well into workflows. I mean, that's everything in work. Integrating into workflows is everything. So I think this is a very grim picture of AI here in this report. So just my opinion, I see some use to AI. These use cases don't have a tremendous amount of industry value, at least not compared to the imagined valuations that people have for it. But they're not useless. Will the cost of running AI sustain these use cases realistically? It's a totally different question, and I don't know. I could only just guess. I think the bigger problem here for us as a conservative, not politically conservative, but in terms of, decision making, leadership, right? Half our economy is AI spending. And these companies are a massive, massive portion of the stock market. That's an enormous, I would say, unprecedented economic risk. I can't even imagine what would happen if the tide really turns on this AI industry. There's so much riding on it. It's just hard to even contemplate what would happen. So I think the risk is extremely, extremely enormous. Can't give you any advice on what to do, but I would be cautious about assuming that AI will be anything even close to what these companies are predicting. When you see these headlines like, I saw the new model of AI and what I saw scared me, right? It's just completely absurd and ridiculous. Yeah, I can do some things, but it's just at best, it's just a tool. And we're struggling to even know how to integrate that tool into doing useful things. Is that really worth half of our country, half the US's GDP? Yeah, I'd say that is an unbelievable risk. So hopefully that was helpful, interesting. You don't have to agree with me, my perspective on things. And I'll talk to you next time.